So SciArt Santa Fe is an organization that promotes excellence in art science at that intersection that we call SciArt. A couple of ways we do this are by hosting a yearly statewide art science exhibition, of which we're happy to present Shimmer this year, and another way is by hosting what are called lasers. Lasers are Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. They happen around the world. They were started by an organization called the Leonardo Society for Art, Science, and Technology, and they put out a journal, and they also give their blessing to lasers around the world. So we're the representative for New Mexico for lasers. We're going to be having lasers, which will be, in this case, panels with artists and other experts every Saturday from 3 to 5, so let people know. If you do want to know more about our programs, if you're not already on our mailing list, you can subscribe at SciArtSantaFe.org. You can subscribe to our monthly newsletter there, and to many of you already donate to SciArt Santa Fe when you register for our events. Thank you. We're so grateful for that. If you want to do more and want to join our Patreon, you can go to support art science at our website, SciArtSantaFe.org, and you can make a monthly contribution as small as $3.14. You can buy us a piece of pie, because we're an irrational group here in Santa Fe. I just want to say how much SciArt Santa Fe is honored to be partnering with St. John's College for this exhibition in the beautiful, newly renovated Peterson Art Gallery. And I especially, they're not here, but I especially want to recognize a wonderful partnership with Chuck Tucker, who has been so instrumental in the entire design of this exhibition from the beginning, designed the exhibition and a wonderful catalog. Chuck is the assistant to the dean and the gallery director here at St. John's College. And an additional thank you to all our wonderful artists that are in the show, and our generous support from UNM, New Mexico Arts, all of our wonderful volunteers and members, and the individual donors like you who want to see art science thrive in our communities across the state. And without any further delay, I will pass it on to Alyce Santoro, who I was so fortunate to get to work with in our last statewide exhibition. Alyce had wonderful work in the Santa Fe Art Institute exhibition, and I was so pleased to get to know her deep knowledge and passion for art and science. So I will pass it on to Alyce.
Thanks, Andrea. I'm just going to introduce our speakers. I'm going to speak last, but I'll introduce our speakers. I want to also thank SciArt Santa Fe and Andrea for coming up with the Shimmer concept, because it's an amazing concept and it's so relevant to right now. And also thanks to Chuck and thanks to our speakers. So Kira, who will speak first. Kira Howard has served as Senior Director of Alumni and Constituent Engagement at St. John's College since 2003. She holds an MA in Museology from the University of Washington and a PhD in Art History from the University of Melbourne, where her research examined the exhibition and reception of Australian Aboriginal art in the United States. Her academic interests include the international exhibition history and reception of Indigenous Australian art, with a particular focus on museums, cultural diplomacy, and cross-cultural interpretation. A former employee of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, she has also published on the life and work of Georgia O'Keeffe. And Palma Maya Johnson is a painter born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. She began studying traditional portraiture in early adolescence and later studied painting and literature at Bard College, Simon's Rock in Western Massachusetts. She relocated to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she's pursuing a master's in liberal arts here at St. John's College. During the week, she also manages an antiquarian bookstore. Her paintings often explore themes of bodily discordance, queerness, Mexican diaspora, and the intersections between nature and man. And I'm Alyce Santoro, and I'm a marine biologist, scientific illustrator turned conceptual artist. as one who's interested in the study of the natural world, I have found that both science and art, as equally valid forms of knowledge production, are equally necessary. I often use sound to illustrate ideas. I live in rural northern New Mexico, where I tend a small farm. And so, Kira, please take it away.
Thank you. So we're without visuals. I'm going to pull some up on my laptop and swivel it so that you have a sense of what I'm alluding to, while recognizing that that's not entirely sufficient. So thank you for your patience. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, SciArt Santa Fe, for including me in this laser panel discussion. And also thank you to my colleague, Chuck. So my name is Kira. As you heard, I serve in the Alumni Relations Department of the Advancement Team here at St. John's College. And this is a particularly exciting time for me to be at the college because we have so many more programs and initiatives that are about visual art. So some of you may have attended or been aware of the Dean's lecture last night, which was on the subject of portraiture. We have an opportunity this summer at Ghost Ranch for our students. And so as an art historian, that's all very exciting and rich opportunity. So the reason that Andrea invited me here today was before I was at St. John's College, a lot of my academic research was based on Australian Aboriginal art. And so most recently, which is still dating back to 2015 now, at the University of Melbourne in Australia. And each of us, or all of the artists in the exhibition, read an essay called Shimmer. And that's the theme. And for those of you who haven't had the benefit of reading this essay, I was going to talk a little bit about the concept, because one of the case studies is in reference to Australian Aboriginal bark art, which is a certain form of art that comes from Arnhem Land in Australia. So Deborah Bird Rose is an American-born, anthropology-educated scholar who has 40 years of scholarship that emerged from her field work in the Northern Territory region of Australia that started in the late 70s, early 80s. And although her work was grounded in anthropology, her writings also consider environmental humanities and ethics. And she lived for stretches of time with people of the Uralin, and was claimed as a sister by a matriarch in the Flying Fox kin. So one topic that comes up in this essay is this idea of multi-species ethnography, which is that you can be in kinship or in a people of animal species as well as humans. So I lived in Melbourne, Australia for 12 years, 6 years from 1999 until 2005, and then another 6 from 2009 to 2015. The first stretch was from my final year of high school through to my first job. And that role was for a contemporary Aboriginal art gallery in downtown Melbourne, Australia. Some of you might be more familiar with the art that we sold in that gallery than the bark art that we're talking about in reference to Deborah Bird Rose. And those are the contemporary art paintings that come from the Western and Central Desert that are done in acrylic on Belgian linen. I have some images, and I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to go to the International Folk Art Market over the July in the rail yard. But the painter here is Gabriela Possum Nungarai, and she paints traditional stories of her country. So not only was she represented at the gallery that I worked at following my undergraduate degree, but again, it was such a pleasure to see her at IFAM. The second was when I was working on my PhD in the art history department at the University of Melbourne, and that was studying the early exhibition history of Australian Aboriginal art in the United States. That was primarily those bark paintings. And those were collected in exhibitions that featured them in a large-scale way beginning in 1941 in an exhibition organized by the Carnegie Foundation that opened at the National Gallery of Art. So during the many years that I was in Australia, we opened all exhibitions and indeed any public programs with a traditional acknowledgement of landowners. So in Melbourne, Australia, that's very familiar to me still. We acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of this land on which we gather. we honor their ongoing connection to this land and pay our respects to elders past and present. This has some resonance for me because one of the first projects that I worked at St. John's College was for Earth Day. And we had a panel discussion and a ribbon cutting. And as part of that was referencing our land acknowledgement here, which is we recognize the original native inhabitants of our campus lands, offer our respect to the people and history of these lands, and formally acknowledge the personal, cultural, and historical significance of these lands for the descendants of these native people of the unceded Tiwa territory. So returning to the idea of Shimmer in the essay that we read, it was published in a volume in 2017 that was based on cross-disciplinary thinking about science, art, and the humanities to explore the idea of Anthropocene, which is in reference to a time when human actions have deeply altered the earth. That essay has 5 sections, and the one that I was particularly interested in based on my background was the notion of the brilliance of motion and encounter based on the bark paintings that I mentioned. And so I have this map here. I don't know, is there a show of hands of anybody who's familiar with the art of Indigenous Australia? Oh, how wonderful.
Not experts, but...
Good, okay, that's so exciting. So some of you may have seen this really itty bitty map. So this is helpful orientation. This map was produced by the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. And it shows the cultural and linguistic diversity of Indigenous Australia prior to colonization. It shows 250 tribal language groups that we refer to as clans, and each of them have their own cultural practices in relationship to land. So the art that we associate with Indigenous Australia, the bark paintings, is based on traditional rock paintings, which many of you may know. As well as ephemeral art practices like tracing in the sand and ceremonial body painting designs. The work of Deborah Bird Rose is very specific in terms of country being relational, and so I think it's really important to identify that it's based in the Northern Territory, and I'm not sure if that's this next slide or not. It is. So the Northern Territory is at the most northern point in the center of the country. So the practice of bark art painting started around 1912 when expeditions led by science researchers such as Baldwin Spencer commissioned paintings on bark to reflect what they saw on rock paintings. And there's a whole story about the production, which I think is really fascinating. The reason bark painting only exists in these regions is because that's where the stringy bark of the eucalyptus tree is acquired for the paintings. So the process is to strip the stringy bark from the trees during the wet season when it's more pliable. That then gets placed over fire to harden and then flattened out for a period of several months. And then primed. And it's not until it's dry and it's undergone that full process that it becomes an appropriate canvas for painting. Of course, the pigment that is used for the bark paintings is from ochre, which is from the land. And one, again, we won't benefit from images here, but Arnhem Land societies are very complex in their structures and I think really interesting for that reason. Everybody is born into a moiety, which is a way of dividing the population between 2 different groups. There's the Duya and the Ureta. And every person, clan, and animate being, whether an ancestor animal is considered belonging to one or the other. And that's in part what determines the subject matter that happens on the bark paintings. So I made a note here of the way that that's divided, which is one is often associated with fire and sun, and certain ancestral beings like the goanna, which is a lizard, or the kangaroo. The Eureka moiety is associated with water, wind, and animals of the water, so consider fish, crocodile, stingray, shark, lightning, snake. And so you can see those here. The concept that Deborah Bird Rose explores is the notion of brilliance, and how it's only once brilliance is achieved that you know that the painting is complete. She references an anthropologist who uses an indigenous word, "were-young," and I'm going to quote her here. "When a painting reaches brilliance, for example, people say that it captures the eye, much in the way that the eye is captured by sun glinting on water. It is a capture that is all over the place. Water capturing and reflecting the sun glinting on water, the eyes of the beholders capture and enraptured the ephemeral dance of it all." I guess bringing that back to my work and my perspective, when I finished my undergraduate degree in Australia and moved to Seattle, Washington to do that degree in museology, I became particularly interested in how exhibitions are used to tell a narrative about art, and specifically art from different regions. And it occurred to me that if done, maybe not incorrectly, but in a certain way, that leads to a distinct narrative. And that's why I pursued that vein of research when I went back for my PhD. This is particularly kind of relevant and interesting for me to think about right now, because the largest exhibition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art ever presented internationally is in the United States right now. It traveled from the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, which is where I spent a lot of my time as a student, to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and later this month opens at the Denver Art Museum. And that's called The Stars We Do Not See, Australian Indigenous Art. And it's 130 works by 142 artists, and it ranges the full range from the bark art that we've been discussing now all the way through new media art. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to see that, and I imagine some of you may be as well. And so I guess by the way of conclusion, since I couldn't share beautiful pictures with you, as we return to the idea of shimmer, we might think of it not only as an aesthetic quality, but as a way of perceiving the world, one that emphasizes relationship, vitality, and interconnectedness, much like the artists in this exhibition that we have here. Thank you very much.
You can just keep this one up for visual aid, I guess, if you that can see it. Hello, my name is Palma Johnson, and I am also very, very happy to be participating in this panel. I'm a painter, and I am also a student here at St. John's, and being part of this show has been an interesting way of my project in moving to Santa Fe, which is trying to integrate my academic and my artistic passions. At St. John's,
the ghost of St. John's.
Indeed. At St. John's, there's a very particular pedagogical approach to our coursework. We sit with texts and we ask questions, and we think, and we sort of try to stay out of context and stay within our personal reactions to the things that we read. And that fits very well for me. I really enjoy that sort of that process. And as I have been painting more and more, I have realized that that sort of thinking heavy approach is more complicated when it comes to painting. When I want to make a painting, my impulse usually is to have a concept that I'm then trying to execute. And I'm realizing now that when I approach painting that way, it comes out sort of strangled. And so instead, especially after moving to Santa Fe, I've been painting with mostly being guided by really attraction that I have to images, and trying not to overthink that attraction or overthink why I am drawn to my personal concepts of beauty. And that's one thing that I think really spoke to me about Shimmer and Deborah Bird Rose's concept. There's a little passage that I want to read from some of her writing on Shimmer. One of the great utterances of other species is this beautiful assent to life. We have a good word for it in English. It is the great, expressive, demonstrative yes. Let us consider the lush, extravagant beauty, flamboyance, and dazzling seductiveness with which eucalypts say yes. They burst open sequentially, and when they burst, every branch and twig says, yes, more buds, more flowers, more color, more scent, more pollen, more nectar, more and more, and all that can be conjured from within the tree to reach out into the world with this great, vivid, multisensorial call, yes. And for their part, the flying foxes come racing to respond. Flying foxes being one of her main subjects. So that was interesting to me because there's a real emphasis on, Shimmer is this interconnectivity between all of us, between multiple species and a consciousness of that relationship that I think in modern day we tend to ignore or forget or take for granted. And what I liked about that passage is that it emphasizes this sort of natural attraction. There's a very visceral, sort of instinctual yearning in the components of this shimmering experience. And I found that in painting, that's sort of what I'm trying to be guided by, is looking for beauty. And beauty is such a complex thing. I ask myself a question that people have been asking themselves for thousands of years, which is, what is beauty and why do I find certain things beautiful? And so to be led by my personal instincts with beauty, in some ways it has been interesting to think about that in relationship to interconnectedness, that there's some part of us that in trying to find community, a mechanism of that community is the visual and the sensorial, that we can recognize these little sort of indescribable components of a plant or a flower or an animal or a person. And so in my work, I'm also quite interested in interiors and exteriors. This, if you could see that, this is maybe one example. I often am incorporating a lot of, flora and fauna into my work, and I like to engage with that. The standard way of thinking about interiors and exteriors is that we assign the exterior to nature, to plants, to animals, as this thing, this world that is separate from humanity. It might be occupied by humanity temporarily, we might observe it, but it's an exterior world. And the interior world is the world that human beings construct. And that's often houses, rooms, bodies. And so I've been very interested in looking at these images in the interior that reflect the exterior, how a plant or a flower gets replicated in all of these mundane ways, in the pattern on a rug or a curtain or a couch, a carving in the piece of wood on some little corner of your cabinet. The way that this sort of reverence for nature, for the exterior, for that form of beauty seeps into a very everyday, sort of often overlooked reality. And so my paintings are often trying to kind of integrate these interior and exterior spaces. I don't know if I have some big sense of what that means, but I'm interested in trying to sort of put those images together, the outside, the plants, the animals, and then the way that those plants and animals have dictated our aesthetics in terms of how we make furniture, how we sort of clothe and occupy the spaces that we live inside. And one thing too that I've been, my other love in life besides painting is literature, particularly Latin American literature. And there's a sort of movement within 20th century Latin American literature, especially in the boom. If you've ever heard of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Kim, which is in English magical realism. In Spanish, often it's the fantastic real, lo real fantástico. And that idea is often about taking the mundane parts of everyday life and not adding a magic, but sort of exposing the magic out of that mundanity. A famous example in Gabriel Garcia Marquez is describing dentures as this sort of magical, incredible, life-giving object where you put it in your mouth and suddenly the body has transformed into something 40 years older. And that has a very particular context, magical realism. It gets that word gets tossed around a lot, but it has a particular history, which is that in colonized countries in Latin America, in a place that has been separated a lot from indigenous wisdom and indigenous art, there is a sort of vibrating, shimmering magic that still exists even in those mundane lives. And so there's a famous author named Alejo Carpentier who early in the 20th century he wrote a lot about the fantastic real, and he said, in Europe they have to kind of make up all these magical things. They have to impose magic. And in Latin America, the magic is just it's in our blood. It's in there. It's in the trees and the plants. And you see this a lot in the art that comes from, especially from Cuba or Colombia, this integration of nature and man and sort of finding the fantastic in things that have previously been overlooked as primitive. And so, again, in engaging with Deborah Bird Rose's work, I saw a lot of that in there, that what she's identifying is not just this, this particular beautiful, incredible, sort of magical thing about how beings are attracted to one another, but that's the core component of connectivity as a whole, how all of us sort of connect to nature and have suffered quite a lot from suppressing that part of ourselves. And so, yeah, I in reading her work a little bit, I really connected with this question of what does it mean to find beauty, to be attracted to something, and how can that relate to our particular responsibilities, our participation, our fundamental connection to the world that we occupy, and occupy not always so nicely, but we're trying. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm Alyce. I was a scientist before I was an artist. I'm going to tell you a little story about how that happened. I thought there might have been more students here, so I was going to gear my talk towards something that might be helpful to students. But anyway, might be of interest. So I have a fake organization called the Obvious International. I made a zine based on what I'm going to talk about. But what I'm going to talk about is sort of an encapsulation of a much larger thesis called An Intricate Ensemble, the Art Science of an Ecological Imaginary for the Anthropocene Epoch. And this is available on my website for a free download. It's dense, and it's about how Western science has come out of a tradition that is very dualist, and that there have been people throughout history, such as the Romantic naturalists, and also the surrealists, who questioned this. And I will elaborate on this in my talk. I'm really sorry there's no images, because the images were a big part of it. Okay, so my work in all its forms has been part of a 30-year exploration of the question, why SciArt? So as many people as there are in this exhibition, and probably in this room, there's going to be different answers to the question, why SciArt? I'm going to tell you how I came to that. And I feel like Shimmer is such a perfect way of conveying something that is obvious but often overlooked. And I think both of you brought that up in your talks as well. I feel like if Shimmer were more widely understood, it could be of great use to those of us who work at the intersection of art and science. And I strongly believe those who understand and are able to combine art and science in critical and nuanced ways are needed now more than ever. There's no one way to get here. There's no one right way to combine art and science, but for me, it was not a straightforward path. For a young person in the 1980s who wanted to find ways to combine art and science, to communicate about the wonders of the natural world, it wasn't easy. There were no programs in interdisciplinary studies, the environmental humanities, or ecological arts. Maybe there were programs in science communication that had to do with writing, but I didn't know what they were, and nobody knew what to do with me. So I decided to pursue an education in science first, because for me it was really important to be a good scientist. I wanted to understand science, and I wanted to know something about the subjects that I was about to illustrate. I didn't want to just presume that I knew enough to be able to illustrate them. I got a degree in marine biology in 1990, and I immediately moved to Providence, Rhode Island, for Rhode Island School of Design still has a wonderful continuing education program in scientific illustration. It's very cheap. It's not a master's program. You can work during the day and go to school at night, which is exactly what I did. And I thought I would wait tables or work in a coffee shop, but what I actually got to do is work at the University of Rhode Island on several different science projects. One was a salmon aquaculture project, and one was a study of marine microzooplankton, where I got to float around on the surface of the North Atlantic for 3 months of the year collecting zooplankton and then bringing them back to the lab and identifying them. And a lot of my experiences being a scientist radicalized me in many ways that I will elaborate upon. For example, floating around on the surface of the ocean in the late 1990s, looking at larval fish populations and microzooplankton, and every year we were seeing less and less. And I would say to the chief scientist, shouldn't we be saying something about this? And they're like, well, we have 10 more years worth of, we have to analyze the data. We can't just go around saying something, and that's true. That is true. But as a scientific illustrator, I could say something. And so I felt responsible for sounding alarm bells before scientists could do it, because it's not scientific. And I'll get to that more in a second. So I quickly realized things were not going to go as I imagined, and this is an illustration that I did when I was working on the salmon aquaculture project. The people in the lab next to me were doing a flounder study, and I was interested in the flounder. And what is interesting about flounder is that they're born as a fish with eyes on both sides of their head. There's nothing about a flounder. They have a normal skeleton. There's nothing about a flounder that tells you that it's going to become a flat fish. And by about day 13, they start swimming a little bit sideways, and then they become a flat fish. And the eyes migrate up to the top of the head. And I said to the scientists in the lab, why is this happening? And they said, we have no idea. And I said, that is what I want to study. What do you mean you have no idea? So this was in the early 90s, and it wasn't until the 2000s that scientists actually figured out that it is a thyroid hormone that causes this to happen. Every single flounder is born a flat fish. It's amazing to me still, even though we know that it's a thyroid hormone, that every fish has to go through this process of evolution.
Are you saying that both eyes are on the same side of the flatfish?
Yes, a flounder has two sides that. Okay, so a flounder is born a normal fish, bilaterally symmetrical, with eyes on either side of its head. And then by the time it's a month old, it starts swimming sideways. And then the eyes start to migrate up to the top of the head, and then it becomes a flat fish. And this happens with every single fish. It's not that they're born that way. The head didn't evolve to be that way. So to me, this is Shimmer. This is what Shimmer is. It's this thing that is too miraculous. Like, even though we know it's a thyroid hormone, it's still crazy. Like, it's just an amazing thing. So another thing that happened is this was even earlier. This was in the late 1980s. I was working in a lab, and I was sitting in the lunchroom with some other lab people from the other labs, and we were talking about junk DNA. And I said, what do you mean junk DNA? Because it doesn't code for anything, they thought. And so I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why don't we call it, we don't know yet what it does today. And so I made this print, and I was at, this was at RISD, so I was going to school at night and being a scientist in the daytime. Everyone thought I was crazy. Like my science friends thought, oh, she's an artist, but she's being a scientist. And then at night I would go to art school, and they're like, but aren't you a scientist? And anyway, it was a very strange time. So I made this print, 92% junk, according to science, question mark, and I hung it in the lab. And it was not my original intent to make art for scientists. My original intent was to try to make art that would illuminate the general public who didn't know something about a certain thing. But all of a sudden I realized that I had this question, like I was interested in things that were not scientific. So the problem was that I wanted to communicate wonder, mysterious, awe, the perplexing, at least not scientific according to the so-called Western brand of science, which I was trained in, and one that has come to dominate the world in so many ways. So does anyone here know the steps in the scientific method? Anyone?
Yes.
So the steps are, you can't see them, but you develop a testable hypothesis, and what that means is that it has to be quantifiable. You design an experiment with controls to eliminate bias. You run the experiment, you analyze the data, you formulate a conclusion, and you try to replicate it. Well, as a scientist, I am down with this. But as an artist, I have problems immediately. I can't develop a hypothesis for something that's going to be quantified. I'm not quantifying what I'm doing. But my real problem is with the second one, design an experiment with controls to eliminate bias. As a good scientist, you have to be unbiased, and you have to put controls into your experiment. In other words, if we're going to run a test on a pharmaceutical, I have to give some of you a placebo. I can't give you all and I have to not know who's taking the placebo, or else my own personal bias may interfere with the project. But I'm interested in my relationship with the subject. In fact, so much so that what my art is about is when I lose track of where the edges of me are and the thing that I'm looking at, and I'm the observer. So, this is exactly the thing about the observer and the observed being connected. I mean, we're always the one asking the question. We're always the one analyzing the data. And in my art, I'm interested in the place where that thing merges. I know that I'm onto something when I forget where the edges of myself are. As a scientist, I understand the importance of the scientific method, but as an artist, I run into problems. So this is what's known as dualism. This is a thing that the early philosophers of science, Copernicus, Galileo, Bacon, Newton, Kepler, Descartes, were intent upon. To them, the universe was like a giant machine. They believed the whole thing could be figured out by breaking it down into individual parts. Conveniently, to separate oneself, to place oneself outside of and ostensibly above a nature, something out there, it makes it easy to extract, exploit, enslave, colonize, and dominate. And this is precisely what happened, and this is where we are right now. Undo dualism. So this is a little pithy saying I've come up with, and I have it on a pencil. Undo dualism. But there were other early scientists and philosophers, such as Wolfgang von Goethe, who lived from 1749 to 1832, and Alexander von Humboldt, 1769 to 1859, who recognized that a scientific method that places, in particular, European men at the top of a hierarchy had great potential to cause some problems. Goethe called for a kind of science, yes. Goethe called for a kind of science he called delicate empiricism. Delicate empiricism invites the practitioner to use empirical methods for the purposes of certain kinds of research, while bearing in mind that nothing and no one is ever actually separate. This is precisely what people in the contemporary environmental humanities, such as Deborah Bird Rose, have been trying to get across. This is what the concept of shimmer, which she borrowed from Australian Aboriginal people, is all about. Shimmer, in my estimation, is the thing we can't quantify because it is not quantifiable. We don't know how the fruit bats know when their favorite flowers are blooming 1,000 miles away, and we don't know how the flowers know to be the right shape for bat tongues, or that blooming at night is perfect for fruit bats. It's a wonder, it's marvelous, and marveling at the world reminds us to love it. And being in love with the world and one another is what will help us do the things that lead to better, healthier outcomes. Quantification is important and serves many extremely useful functions under particular circumstances and for particular purposes. But it is not the thing that gets people to understand the underlying causes of the messes we are in or moves people to action. Remembering that we are not actually separate might. Incidentally, at the height of another cataclysmic era, World War I, in which tens of millions of people were slaughtered, an art movement emerged that questioned the logic of a civilization that could wreak so much havoc. The Surrealists posed the same questions as the Romantic Naturalists. They warned of the dangers of a real based on a kind of thinking that values the measurable over the unquantifiable. Am I running out of time? Okay, because I just want to read you this. So this is sort of the conclusion of this thesis. So the purposes of my work are, number one, to establish creative practices as essential forms of knowledge production in and of themselves. I am suggesting that artistic techniques, ones that arouse the imagination, senses, and emotions, can effectively be applied in concert with science's rigorous and dispassionate methods. Situations that tend to treat art as an embellishment, capable only of serving as an illustrative or support capacity, or otherwise use art to uncritically reinforce the authority of a science which fails to take humanitarian and ecological concerns foremost into account, are, I maintain, less constructive. And I see a lot of art that all it does is sort of bolster science that is not in a humanitarian vein. So, for example, I mean, fracking, or like any kind of, you can think of lots of kinds of science and technology right now that are not helpful. Nuclear weapons, for example. We have Los Alamos right here, so we all know exactly what that is. And I think that artists who understand what science is have a responsibility to critically engage, not to say that all science is bad, because it isn't. Lots of science is wonderful. But there's an organization called Science for the People, and you can look it up, scienceforthepeople.org. It's been around since the Vietnam War era, and these are scientists who are trying to get people to engage in science in humanitarian ways. And I'm also asking people to critically engage this paradox. Science is asking us to be separate, but a science that is separate can never prove that we're all interconnected. Only art can do that. And that's why it's so important that people who combine art and science do so in a way that is critical and smart. Okay, so my work is about what happens when the observer and the observed lose themselves in one another. What can I learn about the thing I am paying attention to when I lose track of the boundary between it and myself? So you can't really see this, but this is me in 2001, I was younger, wearing a hat made from sea urchin spines. I was very interested in the pencil urchin. I like all kinds of creatures that have these appendages that reach out into the environment, and this is what multi-species ethnography is about. This idea that where does the fruit bat end and the flower begin if they're dependent upon one another. There's another example of figs. A certain type of fig has a certain type of wasp that pollinates it. So is it one species? Because they'll die out. If they're not, if one species dies, they both die out. So where does the species relationship end? So I've made a number of different kinds of wearable pieces that I consider forms of a non-objective laboratory apparatus. These are intended to help me tune into the worlds of other than human entities. And I want to mention here that if you study multi-species ethnography, you'll run across the work of Jacob von Uxküll and his concept of the Umwelt. Uxküll was around from 1864 to 1944, and he was very influenced by Goethe. He believed that species inhabit worlds that are dependent on their morphology, their behavior and environment, and that the unique worlds of other than human creatures cannot be understood using conventional science. He coined the term Umwelt, or life world, to refer to these worlds of subjective experience. So that's what I was trying to do here, is sort of tune into the world of a sea urchin. What would it be like if I had these appendages on my head? And this was going to be a slide that you really can't see, but this was when I was an undergrad. I was on a tropical marine biology class, and I was interested in why these cardinal fish were hanging out inside the spines of a black spined sea urchin. Like, you'd go underwater and there'd be all these fish hanging out in the sea urchin. So I did this study by taking a half a coconut and sticking broom straw in it and waiting to see if the cardinal fish would populate it, and they did. And I was so delighted that they were happy with my art project. So that was another harbinger that going in a normal science direction was not actually going to happen. Another one, which I brought this one in case Bobbe was here, but I don't think she is. This is a ponderosa pine. I made a prints of its bark, and I made a hat to wear so that I would feel what it was like to have bark on my head. This was a tree that was outside my studio in far west Texas, and the tree has since died from the drought, and it has been taken away, and it's just really devastating. So I was going to play you a video that I don't think will come off. There's Bobbe right there. I just dedicated a slide to you, Bobbe. I guess I'll just get to, so the one I was going to show you is on my website. It's a snowy tree cricket that I videotaped and slowed it down slightly. And the sound is so amazing because when you slow the snowy tree cricket down, you get this kind of like pulsating, almost like a rap song. It's unbelievable. You want to dance to it. And it turns out that it is data visualization. In 1897, this guy Dolbear wrote this paper, Cricket as Thermometer. So the crickets, the pulsing of the crickets has to do with the temperature of the air. Okay, so the piece that I have in the show, I have a video, and I consider the video a set of samples. They're samples that I took of shimmering water in an acequia, which is an irrigation ditch that comes off of the Pecos River where I live. I took video of it every single day at different times of the day. And the water is affected by the sand, the pebbles, the twigs, everything that's under the water is affecting the water, the shape of it all the time. And so the video that you'll see in the gallery is not manipulated in any way except for slightly slowed down. I didn't change the colors or any crazy thing. It's the video as it was. Some of it is slightly slowed down so you can see it better. I'm going to be using that as a visual score, and I'm going to be working with some students here at St. John's College who are musicians, and we're going to perform a live improvisation. The piece in the show there's two loops of the video. One just has the water sounds, which you can hear some birds in the background, and one has some added sounds by me. And I made a marimba out of beaver chewed wood, and the beaver chewed wood, each of these, I collect these because they float down the river. And everywhere you hit them, it sounds different. And so I came up with this theory that maybe the beavers are tuning their lodges because, they chose the length of this. It's chewed on both ends by a beaver. And they have all shapes and sizes. So anyway, I made this musical instrument. Some of the pieces are in the gallery. I also made some rattles out of coyote gourds filled with corn and other locally found objects. This was a meditation that I was going to try to do with us, but I think I'm out of time. The idea is to imagine everything is an extension of yourself. Take a deep breath and imagine you are an extension of everything. So this poster says, science is the art of the tangible, art is the science of the intangible. As the unimaginably wealthy and powerful destroy everything around us in a frantic quest to increase their bottom line, those of us who value Shimmer, who are able to understand when and why quantification is necessary and when to abandon it in the interest of empathy and care, quality of life, quality of a healthy, vibrant planet for all, are needed more than ever. Wonders and the marvelous are accessible to everyone, even in the midst of catastrophe. This exhibition is evidence of that. And this is precisely the kind of evidence that will be needed for this planet and all of its exquisitely marvelous, interdependent beings to survive and thrive. Thank you very much. If you have any questions for any of us, hopefully there's time for questions.
Ms. Howard, you just used a word I want to understand better. Barnum land?
Oh, yes. So I was referring to...
Question, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was about Arnhem Land. So one of the slides that I was referencing was of the Northern Territory of Australia, which is where Deborah Bird Rose, who did the ethnography work that we were talking about in this essay, was based. And you wouldn't have seen it because it was a teeny tiny slide on the very top of the Northern Territory of Australia.
You also said Tory something. What was that?
I might have been referring to the Torres Strait Islanders, which is why we tend to refer to Indigenous Australian art rather than just Aboriginal, because it's referring to the Torres Strait Islands that are off the coast to the mainland. That's considered, also considered Indigenous Australian art,
But that's
encompassed
a
in that area.
British term, right?
Torres Strait Islander?
Yeah, it's not an indigenous name.
You're correct. It's geography.
More Western?
Colonizers.
To the song lines,
Mm-hmm.
are they involved in any of this art? Or is there
Oh.
a connection, or how do you connect it? Or
Absolutely.
Could you say more about that?
Of course. So the some of the essay was about Australian Aboriginal dreaming, which is similar to songlines, which is how one traces their personal history back to ancestors and the ancestors that came before them. And so it's the subject of the majority of Indigenous Australian art that you tie back to one's songline. I use it interchangeably with the dreamings, but there are characteristics that are different from one another.
They use that to navigate through the territories, don't they, through the desert areas?
Yes, so I showed some art both on canvas and bark paintings, and a lot of the traditional stories are about voyages and how people came to be in one part of the country and relocated to another, and that's what you're referring to as the songline.
This isn't exactly about the songlines, but it is in Deborah Bird Rose's book about music and the Aboriginal music. The ethnomusicologist Kath Ellis uses the term iridescence in describing Aboriginal music with specific reference to the, pardon my pronunciation, Pitjantjatjara musical system. She explains this unexpected concept with reference to the phenomenon that occurs when background and foreground suddenly flip. And I was thinking about this, like, for example, the rhythm of a piece usually is the basis of it. But if you make the rhythm the foreground, then you can flip it. There's different ways in music of kind of flipping what we think of as maybe the tonic. Maybe it's a higher note as opposed to a bass note. So I was thinking about that reference. It's not exactly like the songlines though, which is more of a map. It's more of a.
Where did you get that book?
I think you can get it at.
Here? At the
Here,
bookstore here?
I don't know about here, but in Santa Fe,
Okay.
I think I got this at Collected Works.
Yeah.
Palma, I had a question. I was so happy that you brought up magical realism. I think that there is a great connection there, and I wanted you to ask if you could elaborate on the concept of connectivity in magical realism. I rediscovered Gabriel Garcia Marquez lately, and I feel like there's so many characters in those books, but because of that, they seem to reinforce this idea of the connectivity across generations. But I know that that's just a very surface understanding of probably what you were referring to. So.
Yeah, I think a big component of that is cyclicality, connectivity through this sort of idea that we are constantly dictated by that which came before us, by things that we sort of can't see. And even in his books, there's a lot of that, a lot of emphasis on generation. And I think that that's particularly relevant because, in a post-colonial time, there's the colonial project aims to belittle the past ancestry. etc. And so I think that a lot of magical realism, at least in the boom movement, is interested in, in resourcing and reconnecting to a past, but as something that also will extend into the future, not just to inform our present moment, but to understand that there are much bigger timelines than the ones that the imperial system might suggest there is. A big part of not everybody agrees, but one idea in that movement is that there's a big debate about classics, actually, about reading classical literature and the canon, and a lot of to participate in the art world, to participate in the mainstream, to gain recognition on an international level, often requires European education. Most of the biggest Latin American writers and artists at some point left their homelands in order to get educated, and that has sort of been brought back to say we need our own, we need our own Greek and Roman texts, essentially. So I think there's a big part of the heart of that is this reconnection in a way that's instinctual and rejecting of these sort of more frivolous modern narratives that aim to subjugate people. Yeah.
So would that make Neo-Platonism more relevant? Like, in listening to you talk, I thought of the statement that comes out of that: the good, the true, and the beautiful. And somehow, that seems to relate to all of this. And I'm wondering if this movement you're talking about goes back to that.
Yeah, I don't know if specifically, but certainly, I mean, I think there's a big dialogue about beauty as this thing that can be demoralized, because, again, not to talk too much about colonialism, but the colonial project often, or at least for Western Europe, moralizes beauty. This gets implicated into race and ethnicity. It decides that certain things are barbarous and other things are sophisticated, and that's aesthetics are a colonial tool. And there's a lot of power then in trying to recognize beauty in the world as something that doesn't have to be slotted into good or bad, that can just exist, that can just be this shimmering, marvelous thing. Yeah.
Agreed. No one has said anything about energy. Is that not what shimmer is?
Maybe.
There are references to pulsing.
Yeah.
The part that I think I was rushed because I was reliant on my slides to pace me somewhat. One point that I didn't reference that she speaks to is shimmer is one's ability to see and experience ancestral power. And for me, I think that feels like energy, and it feels like pulsing. I don't know that I have a recollection of the word energy, but she references dancing all night long, and the experience of that, and that kind of coursing through her body as the ancestral power is also very energetic.
Aesthetic, yeah, it's energy, yeah. Well, it comes from the Aztecs.
Right.
About vibration, when I hear the word shimmer, I think of vibration. Does she ever talk about that at all?
I don't remember
I
that.
think she does bring up the word vibration. I think she talks about magnetism. Magnetism?
Well, electromagnetic.
Yeah.
Light is.
Right.
Is an electromagnetic.
Transmission. I curated a show called Transmission.
Oh.
It's an energy that's like
I think of things.
Shimmer grabs you, it allows you or brings you into the experience of being part of the vibrant and vibrating world, she says.
Yeah, it's transmissions, it's energy. What year was that book written?
I think it was right before she died in 2018.
Okay.
The book is copyright 2022, but she died in 2018.
Wow.
It's $25, but enough.
She doesn't mention Madame Blavatsky or any of the, yeah,
How did you know?
1800s, English from the 1800s who were into that, yeah, transmission and energy.
Oh, right.
Absolutely.
I thought of buying it, but I didn't.
Well, thank you.
But the library.
Any other questions
the
or
library
comments?
wasn't going to be able to get it.
Is that a question or comment? Well, we are having a opening reception with a DJ, and that should be starting in just a few minutes. So please hang out. That's going to be in the gallery. So hang out for that. And again, we're having panels each week with some of the artists from the show and other experts coming in. And I just want to thank you guys so much, because that was such a, really illuminating the ideas that were really just kernels when we talked about the show, and it's been amazing how things are forming and taking on so many different branches. Thank you.
Thank you.